We are pleased to be joined now by Kevin Shea, sports director at Spectrum News 1 in Worcester, to talk about this matchup. Kevin, thanks for coming on. How are you today?
I'm good, guys. Thanks for having me on.
All right, so let's talk about this Holy Cross team. It's a program that has gone to the NCAA playoffs 4 years in a row from 2019 to 2022. Off to a 1-3 start this year. Now that Bob Chesney has left, he's at James Madison. New coaching staff comes in, but 3 losses, but all by one possession. Take us through the first month of the season here and how some of these close games went the other way.
Yeah, it's definitely a deceiving record, right? With the close losses, URI scores in the final minute, in the final 30 seconds to win that game. Holy Cross was leading that game, and then URI drove. They scored in the finals 30 seconds to win that game. UNH, they lose by 1 point. And then last week against Yale scores with under 30 seconds left to go ahead, and then Holy Cross gets it down to the Yale 40, and they have a Hail Mary at the end. But it's really a couple plays. A couple plays is, I'm sure every coach in the nation would probably tell you, but a couple plays, probably 1 or 2 plays that a coach could point to in each of those 3 losses and say, if this goes differently, we win this game. So they're that close. I think probably the biggest thing is just remaining positive for them. And they do have, you mentioned they had tremendous success, 5 straight Patriot League titles. They've gone to the NCAA tournament. I think you look at the senior class, the fifth-year guys, and maybe to a little extent the juniors, but the fifth-year guys and the seniors, they've known success, and being around the practices and being around the games, they're certainly not panicking.
What can you tell us about this new head coach? Dan Curran comes in from Merrimack, spent 11 years there, takes over for Bob Chesney, who had a lot of success, as we've touched on. What can you tell us about this new coaching staff and what they're trying to build? Are they kind of bringing in their own thing, or are they just trying to build upon what Bob Chesney had going on?
Probably a little of both. Every coaching staff is going to have their own, is going to put their own stamp on a program. And then there's some things that, I think you recognize, okay, this has been working really well, and let's keep that going. One of the biggest things was keeping strength coach Chris Grotzky. I mean, that was a huge coup for Dan Curran and for Holy Cross to be able to keep him at Holy Cross, because you guys know, I mean, it's in college football, the head coach is 1, the strength coach is 1A, and there was one of the coaches told me, a college football coach told me years ago, the strength coach is the culture meter for your team, because they spend so much time with the guys in the off season, during the season. And if they have a good relationship with the head coach and the head coach trusts them, and Bob Chesney and Chris Grotzky had that, but Dan Curran has that with Chris Grotzky too. And even just when he can tell them, hey, the guys need a little rest, or the guys need to be pushed, or the guys need a kick in the butt, to have that guy with you is huge. But I think who Dan Curran is, he is tough. He's a tough, hard-nosed guy. That's how he played. He was a running back at UNH, and then spent a little time in with NFL teams, and then with arena football. But his stamp and his brand for Holy Cross is going to be physical, hard-nosed. Let's establish the run and let's smack you on defense. That's the culture that he is setting.
Take us through personnel, if you could, on both sides of the ball. Some of the key players that SU fans are going to need to look out for on offense and defense.
Yeah, sure. We'll start offensively with Joe Pazanski, the quarterback, and this is a guy who's waited his turn. He was behind Matt Sluka, who's made some
yes.
headlines this week.
We'll get to him. We'll get to him.
right. But he was behind him, and you could make a case that Matt Sluka was the best player in Holy Cross history. I mean, he just absolutely dynamic. But Joe Pazanski, and I had coaches tell me this the last 2 years when at practices, they would say, look, if Sluka gets hurt, we're okay. We are fine. Like Joe Pazanski, people don't realize, because he's in a backup role, how good he is. He's smart. He throws a tremendous arm, throws a great ball, and he can run. So you've seen a little bit of that. It's different, obviously, when you jump into the starting role and it's all on your shoulders. There's a different pressure there. And I think that's what Joe's adjusted to really well the last couple weeks. just kind of finding his feet, finding, underneath him. He's a great leader. Like, these guys will run through a wall for him. He's really enthusiastic, and this is how he's always been. When he was the backup, he was, as a sophomore, as a junior, he was the exact same person that he's been right now. He hasn't changed. And I think he's getting more and more confident. I think also they're developing some new guys. Like you saw the last 2 weeks, Max Mosey had caught his first touchdown pass. He's a converted quarterback. He caught his first touchdown pass against Bryant. He was the leading receiver. Last week, he was the leading receiver. This kid, Max Warren, a sophomore, caught a 74-yard touchdown pass on the first play of the game last week against Yale. And he had been a guy who hadn't been a part of the offense. So I think the offensive staff, they're also learning some of these new guys and how they can get them into the offense. And because obviously with wide receivers, you can't just rely on two guys, just run every pass route. They're going to be gassed. So if you can get more guys in and you develop more talent, you're going to be a more effective offense, but also a more dangerous offense, just because you don't have guys, dragging their feet in the fourth quarter going, man, I've been running 60-yard, 50-yard routes here since the very first snap of the game. So those guys, Jake Peterson, the tight end, is a big weapon, and he's always been, like, the coaches have always marveled at him and said, look, when he was a freshman, I remember Justin Roper was the offense coordinator. He said, look, he has NFL potential with his feet, the way his feet are. He runs like a wide receiver, but he's 6'4", and he's got these tremendously long arms. He's got arms like he's 6'7". He's a matchup nightmare for linebackers and safeties, and he's always been that way. He's just been dinged up a little bit. He was behind a fifth-year all-league kid for a while, so he played a lot, but he might not have been the featured guy. He's been more the featured guy in the pass game, and he's had some really big games. And he blocked, like he said he always wants to be like George Kittle or like Rob Gronkowski as a blocker. He said obviously those guys are great catching the ball, but he goes, I love the way they would block. And that's what the coaches all talk about, the way Jake Peterson blocks and that he's tenacious. In terms of the offensive line, it all starts with the center, Christo Kelly. He's a fifth-year kid, and he is definitely the leader of that offensive line. And he's kind of the spirit in many ways, too, of the offense. Like, he's a guy that he just wants a 3-hour fight. Like, when he puts the helmet on and straps up the chin strap, he's going, let this be a 3-hour fight. Like, I don't want this to be pretty. I'm not out here to be friends with anyone. Let's go. So I would say offensively, and then you see they lost their leading running back to Jordan Fuller in the Bryant game. Now, he was essentially a 4-year starter. He split time with Peter Oliver, but had a ton of, had the most career rushing touchdowns in program history, all this stuff. They lose him for the year. So you got two kids that stepped up, Jaden Clairvaux and Sam Slade. Clairvaux, he's like 220 pounds. He'll say, like, look, I don't want to be considered a power back, but I'm kind of a little of both. Like, he can put his foot in the ground and go, and he's fast, and he's got good speed and some shiftiness, but he can also lower the shoulder at 220 and try to run you over. Sam Slade, more of a third down, like more of an outside runner and a pass catcher out of the backfield. He's got track speed. I would say that's the offense. And then when you look at the defense, they've been real beat up on the D-line, but the kids that have gone in have played really well. They had a freshman, Pritchard Sewell, who's like, they're really high on him. He just doesn't have a lot of experience, but he's gone in because of some injuries, and he showed some real good flashes. And then even some kids like Kevin Gillis, who have just plugged along. He's a senior, and he got his opportunity, and he's played well. And then in terms of linebackers, Frankie Monty, Drew Spinagati, who's just a really good, solid linebacker. He's a sophomore. Ken Sante's a sophomore. They both run very well, and they're physical. Frankie's always been just a ball of energy, loves to hit, and he reads plays very, very quickly. In the terms of the secondary, I would look at number 6, Carlo Crissetti is probably, when you look at kids or guys and you say, okay, he's an FBS type of athlete, body player, that's him. He's like 6'4", he's probably 210, 215. They'll rush him, they'll blitz him. He can cover wide receivers, he can cover tight ends or running backs. he also returns kicks. So he's really like an outside linebacker in this defense. But I don't know many outside linebackers that are kick returners as well, and that just kind of speaks to his athleticism.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, you bring up FBS-level talent. Obviously, they're going up against an opponent that's got FBS talent across the board in Syracuse. They played Boston College last year. What does Coach Curran and his staff, what do they hope to get out of games like this, other than, the paycheck and all that, but just from a football perspective and as it pertains to the rest of their season, what are they trying to get out of a game like this?
Well, first of all, their mindset, and I was there Tuesday at practice, and Christo Kelly was leading this charge, but was saying, like, if you're just going there to play a game and to experience the Dome, then stay home, because we're going there to win. And I think probably the biggest shift over the last, and it might be 5 years. I mean, really since Bob Chesney got there, was when they play these games, and not that first year, but after that, because they recruited so well, and they got the talent level went way up. But when they play these games, like BC last year, they went in there with a mindset of we're going to win this football game. We don't hope to win it. We don't think we're going to win it. We know we're going to win it. I think that's the difference. And they took BC to the wire. I mean, Sluka was out of bounds by like an inch. Otherwise, they win that game. But they firmly believed that they were going to win that game going in. That's the same mentality here, even though they're going up and they're playing Syracuse, and it's going to be sold out, and it's going to be in the Dome. And but their mentality is we believe we're going to win this football game.
You bring up, you've mentioned Matthew Sluka here a couple of times, and we all know he's been in the news quite a bit over the course of the last 24 to 36 hours. What is your take on this whole thing that's playing out with UNLV right now?
I think it's interesting, right? Because it's almost the tip of the iceberg or the first domino to fall, because I have to believe in other programs that kids were promised NIL money that has not been delivered. But then once the kids are on campus, right, and once they start to play, I'm sure some of the, coaches are like, okay, well, we got them. They're playing now, so what are they going to do? And I think, you saw a couple other guys from UNLV after Sluka said, okay, you guys promised me certain money, you didn't pay, I'm out. I'm going to keep my eligibility, and I'm out. I'll go somewhere else. And then all of a sudden, a couple other kids did it. So my guess is he wasn't the only one on that team that was promised money that didn't receive it. But I do think in terms of this whole new NIL thing, it probably is the tip of the iceberg that and again, whether it's the coaching staff or whether it's a separate NIL group that's, in many ways separate from the college or separate from the coaching staff, promising kids certain things and then not delivering. And, I think in the past it was, well, what leverage do the kids have? Well, I think Matt Sluka, and I think this is why it resonates across the country. He's the first one to say, no, I have leverage here. I'm leaving before I use up my eligibility. I'll retain my red shirt, and I'll go somewhere else next year. Because, coaches obviously have done that for years, right? Coaches have, recruited kids, and then if they get an opportunity, they bounce for a bigger paycheck or a bigger opportunity, a bigger school. And now the pendulum's kind of shifted in a sense to give some strength and some leverage to the players. And Sluka's really the first one, at least publicly, obviously, to do that when it looks like the deal, their end of the bargain. UNLV didn't hold up their end of the bargain.
Yeah, and we've been talking a lot about this, and what can be done, right? And I think one thing we look at is we say, well, let the schools be directly involved with NIL, because then you can have an agreement from an assistant coach to a player, and you can put it in writing, and you can say, if you come here, we'll give you $100,000. The player says, okay, let's put it in, and then you've got a contract. Whereas now it's like, well, the coaches can't really talk about it. They need the collective, and it's a verbal agreement, and there's gray area. And I guess so. My last question is, Kevin, to you. I mean, what do you think can be done to make sure that things, kids quitting in the middle of the season is not good for anybody, right? Regardless of the circumstances around it. How can we avoid this in the future?
No, you're right. It's terrible. Look at all the excitement that UNLV was garnering in the top 25. They had that big win over Kansas. Everyone's talking about it. I think you're right. I think you have to have the college has to be tied in some way, shape, or form. And then, like anything, like any pro athlete or anyone that's being paid to play, there's going to have to be contracts that are signed. and whether there's agents that, the individual kid gets an agent, or maybe there's agents supplied by the college. Maybe the college says, okay, we have these 3 agents for football, we have this 1 agent for basketball, 1 for hockey or lacrosse, and maybe they go through that agent if they don't have someone that they want to use themselves. But there's got to be a contract that's drawn up, and it says, okay, you agree to pay me $100,000. I get 50 on August 1st when camp starts, and I get, the other 50 after week 5 or whatever it is,
Right. Yeah. No, something's got to be done, right? Because it feels like chaos to some degree. Listen, it was a pleasure, Kevin, chatting with you. Thanks so much for the great insight. Enjoy the game this weekend, and hopefully we can talk again down the road.
Sounds good, guys. Thanks.
All right, Kevin Shea joining us here. We'll take a quick time out. Today's business next. Matt Park at 1:30. Back after this on ESPN Radio.